In terms of its reception, there was just a panel discussion for about 2.5 hours at the ETS conference with a number of scholars. And I was relatively pleased with it. You're not going to have a discussion in an academic meeting that doesn't bring out some criticisms, and some of the criticisms had to do with what I should have included. And of course, when I wrote the book, I understood that, and I tried to repeat to the panel what I said in the last chapter, the next to last chapter, that I realize it's impossible to write perhaps even a sufficient, certainly not an exhaustive biblical theology, but one that's going to please everybody, because something's going to be left out. One of the questions was, did I really see that the Old Testament was organically connected to the New? Because I talk about creative new developments of the Old and the New, and I don't see that as an untethering of the Old from the New or a complete cutting off. I do see that there's an organic connection or an organic thread that continues from the Old to the New, but under progressive revelation, of course, there are some things that Old Testament authors would not have been fully aware of, I think partially. So I give the example of an apple seed, and it begins to sprout in the Old Testament and grow more as the Old Testament progresses. It becomes an apple tree in the New, and then at the consummation of the final coming of Christ, you actually have the apples. And I understand why some scholars actually see a lot of discontinuity between the Old and the New. They look at the seed, they look at the apple tree, they say those aren't the same things. But, as I mentioned earlier, if you really try to trace, whether thematically or especially through interbiblical exegesis, how the Old is using earlier parts of the Old, these developments in the New become a little more understandable if you trace the full-orbed canonical understanding of that Old Testament text even before you get to the New. So I see that organic connection in that way. And also, just think of human communication. I think Old Testament authors had an explicit focused intention, but they also have what I call a latent intention, or what I call a thick descriptive peripheral hermeneutical vision. By that, what I mean, if I had a student in my house in the summer afternoon, I said I love nothing more than sipping lemonade and listening to Bach on a warm, sunny afternoon. And if that student went to another student a few days later and said, oh, Beale, he loves to hear Bach on a summer afternoon. And if the student heard that said, well, how about Pachelbel and Albinoni and Telemann? And the answer would be yes, because I was actually willing and etc. in that Bach, and really I was talking about a genre, but I had Bach as the explicit focus. And so I think Old Testament authors have a specific focus, but there's a larger legitimate what I call secondary or peripheral intention that they have that New Testament authors may bring out that may look like, oh, they're not developing that Old Testament text, but there are ways to get at that peripheral intention by looking at the immediate broad context and even canonical context that controls that. So that was part of the discussion. But in terms of the reception, I've been very pleased. Had emails, number of comments on how people have appreciated how I see that the New Testament biblical theology is greatly rooted in the Old Testament. And that was the main point of the book, is to, some people have hit on this in various ways. Peter Stuhlmacher and Hübner in Germany, more than most Americans or people in England, scholars. So I tried to thoroughly, as much as I could, ground New Testament theology, the major facets of New Testament theology in the Old Testament. And I found that people have appreciated that canonical sense, that you really have a much more rich understanding of the New Testament when you ground it in the Old. And so I've been encouraged by that, both from students and other professors, as well as pastors. So that's been greatly encouraging to me.